footage of some Vincent motorcycles at Willow Springs. That was the first day Marty Dickerson had ever put his full dustbin on. Number 34 is my bike. Number 98 is John Edgar's Lightning, ridden by Alan Tompkins. What Dickerson discovered when he first put the shell on the bike was that the front wheel was rubbing and he had to make the cutaways a little deeper in the fairing. This was the gray Flash that he bought from Eugene Alcott, the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Vincent distributor for the East Coast. A fellow named Crin Tiu on a BMW. This was a practice session at Willow Springs. If you've ever seen pictures of Willow Springs today, that's me on my Vincent. It was a Rapide that Marty Dickerson had built up for a guy named Bill Stetzenmeyer, and Bill blew it up on a cross-country trip, and I bought it from him and put it together and raced it quite successfully for several years. I was a high point rider in the open class for a couple of years on that Vincent twin. As I said before, if you've been to Willow Springs lately or seen pictures of it, you can see how desolate and barren it was back in the 50s. These pictures were photographed around 1958. As readily noticeable, we used to pit on the inside of the racetrack in the old days. That's Alan Tompkins. There's Dickerson, L.B. Stewart, Dickerson's pit man. And this is me coming around the, now that was the BMW, here I am, coming around the top of the hill, just so my buddy Jack Gray could take a couple of feet of movie film of it. This was a beginning of a lightweight impromptu race, and here's a start of a heavyweight practice race. That's me out in front. As you can see, I used to get a really terrific jump off the line on these guys, and we had a bump start in those days. And I usually stay out in front for a couple of laps, and then the real fast guys would catch me. And the racetrack is wider now. It's a much smoother composition. They had like 3/4 inch of gravel in the blacktop when they first paved it. The racetrack was the brainstorm of Harold Wendell Mathewson, who was a factory Indian hill climb rider in the 30s and 40s, had his own glory riding for Indian and hill climbs. And there's some very interesting stories that surround the origin. That's me on my bike. That's my old truck. And a couple of pictures of my buddy who took the pictures of me, Jack Gray. I let him take a couple of laps on the bike. That's my old truck that we used to haul the bike up the races in. So that this was a road race at Tecate, Mexico, on an airport circuit. That was the only time I was out in front all day, when I borrowed a guy's Sportster to show everybody around the racetrack. We swept it from 8 o'clock in the morning until noon, and then broke for lunch, and at 12:30 the wind came up and blew all the sand right back on it, so we just went ahead and raced with the sand on it. That was me on that Sportster out in front, guiding the racers around to show them where the course went. It was pretty simple. We went up one side of this airport strip and down the other. A lightweight start. The guy you'll see in the back trying desperately and in vain to get his motorcycle started, being pushed, was Gene Wise on a Roomie. This near the end of the lightweight race. They started the big bikes in 3 waves, 350s in the front, 500s in the middle, open class bikes in the back. If you have a large screen TV or a way of slowing the picture down, you can see me start from the back row and pass a whole bunch of guys right off the line, and my bike started very quickly and easily. And I had tweaked the forks at Willow the race before, and I put a Norton front end on my bike for this race. Now, yeah, I'm long gone already. And Don Vesco was there, George Pena, Pierre Rabhi, a whole bunch of those. There's me on the Vincent. You can see how slow it was in the corners. And the corners are covered with sand. And the dirt riders just ran off and left us. I could pull them all on the straightaway, of course, with my twin. But in the corners, it just wasn't that good, especially those hairpins at one end of the circuit and the other. Another fellow that was racing with a handicap, I believe there's some footage of him in here someplace. And you see the guys with the high bars, they're just putting their feet out broadside in the corners like a TT course. Or like the old AMA riders used to do it. I think that's Bill Lewis on a G50 matchless. There I am again on my twin. That was my original set of racing leathers, two-piece, and no way to sew the jacket to the pants in the back, so it was always a t-shirt sticking out. And some later film on this tape, you'll see Dale Alexander did the same thing today, raced against Mike Hillwood at Willow Springs. This is another impromptu practice session at Willow Springs. Number 12 is Bob Scholl. Number 25 was John McLaughlin. These guys go by so fast, it's kind of hard to identify them all. The starter was Alan Tompkins. He was still running the club at this time. When Tompkins quit the club, everything changed. Not all of it for the best. He was a pretty intelligent guy, and he ran it with a very easy and gentle hand. He always did his best to help the riders if they needed help. I always thought that was a pretty neat shot of that guy coming up the hill there with the smoke coming out of his pipe. That was a concession stand on top of the hill, which is one of only 2 buildings that existed at the track at that time. Guys going down a lineup for another little impromptu practice race. And Tompkins used to stress the fact that it was practice. He didn't want anybody out there overdoing it. Number 5 is Sonny Angel. Number 25, McLaughlin. These are the big bikes. That's Skip Clark, and the tail ender there is Vic Villa, who always seemed to have a hard time starting his Manx until he put 2 spark plugs in the head. He was the one who gave that information to the Norton factory. And when Halewood showed up to ride in 1961, he had a 2-plug head on his Manx. And Villa had engineered that and told him how to do it. Number 123, Don Vesco. Number 114 is Buddy Perriott on his Triumph before he bought his Manx. Number 51, Al Krupa from San Diego. There's Buddy coming out of turn 9. We had a tower there at turn 9. It was about 10 or 12 feet high that I shot these movie films from, which is no longer in existence. Although I think it would be a great idea if they had a tower down there like they used to have. It would certainly give whoever's monitoring that corner a much better view of what's going on the racetrack in case something went wrong. It's not an awful lot of Vincent footage right here, but I did want to show you that shot of Don Vesco. This is November 13th and 14th, 1961, when Mike Halewood rode Willow Springs a one and only time. This was a lightweight race on Saturday. John McLaughlin and Don Vesco on the Honda 4s. That was Vesco. Also had two-piece leathers with his t-shirt sticking out. That's Jeff Calan from Vancouver, British Columbia, on that little red Yamaha. And Vesco would have won this race, but the flagman at that time, that was after Tompkins was gone, worked for McLaughlin. So when Vesco passed McLaughlin near the last lap, the little fellow on the white fairing there passing people like mad is Frank Scaria on a 250 Ducati. The guy black flagged Vesco so McLaughlin could win the race. That's Bill Lewis on a G50. Now that's Halewood and driver with driver in front. You see that wide line that Halewood used to take? There's McLaughlin on the yellow G50, number 25. That's Sonny Angel on a Manx. Vic Villa, number 85, also on a Manx. Bill Lewis on a G50 matchless, followed by Sonny. Driver only rode about half the race. He had stomach flu and he quit early. McLaughlin, that's Al Krupa from San Diego. There's Bill Lewis and Sonny Angel. They kind of stayed together the whole race, way behind everybody else. After driver quit, the only guy on the same lap with Halewood until the 48th lap was Al Krupa when Halewood lapped Krupa. And they had lapped everybody. There's Don Vesco on Bob Fell's Manx. Donnie's bike wasn't running, had a rod knock, so he rode that other bike. That's Dale Alexander, an AMA rider who did real well, but he had to make some pit stops, so it put him way behind. There's Vesco again on Fell's Norton, and Halewood and driver. That other white fairing is Peter Calan from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Yeah, Halewood really taught us a lot about motorcycle racing that day. We thought we were fast until he showed up, and he was just out for a Sunday ride. The fellow you see on that little red square-forked Honda was a Guatemalan racer named Salvador Soto, who came up here in 1960 with another fellow named Luis Giron, who went to the Isle of Man, had an accident, got killed in a car wreck back in Guatemala. Salvador borrowed this 350 Honda street bike, put some tape on the headlight, and proceeded to come in 7th in the race. You can see that line that Halewood takes. He's just so much faster than everybody else. There's Vesco again. There's Al Krupa. And there's Halewood just behind him. And on the next lap, I believe Halewood finally lapped Al Krupa. And Krupa had been the only rider on the same lap with Halewood till that time. They had about 3 more laps to go in the race. There's Sonny and Bill Angel, or Sonny Angel and Bill Lewis again. Krupa. And there's Halewood almost done. You can see the cars leaving. That was the largest crowd we ever had at a motorcycle race at Willow Springs up to that time. We had 6,000 people out there that day. If the fellow who promoted it with me, George French, would have listened to me and got his advertising out a few months earlier, we'd have gotten 15,000 people. But he never put the advertising out till about 2 weeks before the race. But a lot of people in California got to see Mike Hailwood ride and talk to him. So that was a good thing. I said there's not much Vincent footage in this, but I thought I'd put it in there because Vesco is in there. Now this particular footage was shot at Willow Springs. I had customized this Vincent touring model Rapide, and I had hired this girl with the intention of doing some practice shooting this day, and I had an idea for a movie about motorcycles. So we took a crew up there, and I rode the races that day as well, and also shot this footage. Nothing ever came out of it. The girl turned out to be a flake. But we had a little fun shooting it, and as long as I have the film footage, I figured possibly sharing the pretty Vincent motorcycle with other Vincent people might be in order. So our hero is out for a Sunday ride. He comes up, he sees a sign that says racing today at Willow Springs. He decides, well, I'll go watch the race. And he rides in. The beauty of this footage is it was before the Nazis made us wear crash helmets. So you could do pretty much whatever you wanted to do as far as wearing apparel for riding motorcycles. I had intended to dub a bunch of dialogue into this, but the girl, as I said, flaked out on me and we never got a chance, pardon me, to put a soundtrack on it. He's just coming up there to the ticket guy. He said, how much does it cost to get in? The guy tells him, pays his way, and in he goes. As you can see, the approach to the pit area was still very unoccupied. None of the houses or buildings that are at the track today were there at that time. However, at this time they were pitting on the outside of the racetrack by now instead of pitting on the inside. That building that bike's pulling around was the announcing tower. Still no fences, no crash walls or anything like that yet. There was a small crash wall along pit road, and it was made of 55-gallon drums full of sand. So our hero looks around, see what's going on, and all of a sudden he spots this beautiful girl. Handsome devil, isn't he? So he says, well, I've got to go see about this. She seems totally oblivious of her surroundings. So our hero goes over to have a talk with her and see what he can do. So he starts to put his arm around her. She pushes him away. He says, wait a minute, let me talk to you here. I got great things to offer you, lady. She didn't believe a word of it. He's trying to talk her into getting on the bike and going for a ride. And she says, I'd rather go for a ride with one of these racers. See, there's the pit area, those 55-gallon drums. You see that bruise on the bottom of her left thigh. That was one of the problems she had. Her boyfriend was physically abusive, and that prohibited her from pursuing a career in the entertainment industry. She did have an awful nice body on her. She was really a nice girl. She had a great personality and everything. So he sits her on the bike. He says, look, you fit perfect on it. Feel that thing. Feel how great the balance is on it and everything. You know, you just have to go for a ride on it. But she isn't inclined to think she should. It's a touring Model Rapide, but it had a shadow speedometer on it. And she just keeps saying no. No and more no. Lights, camera, action. So he just can't talk her into going for a ride, so he's going to put her back on the tin can where he found her. I wonder if that can was hot on her butt or not. And she just turns around and decides to ignore him completely. The guy cannot understand how this girl could possibly be so unintelligent as to not want to go for a ride on a Vincent, the most wonderful motorcycle on earth. He thinks about it for a long time, and he just can't give up. He's got to give one more try. So he walks over there, and he says, just what will it take to get you to go for a ride with me? And she tells him, well, I get out on the racetrack and show me how good you can ride. If you could ride on a racetrack. He says, well, I can bring my race bike out the next race and ride it, but I just rode my street bike up here today. That's all I got. And do you realize that I'm riding a Vincent, lady? That's the Rolls-Royce of motorcycles. What I had done was told the promoter, Wes Cooley, that I was going to donate her as a trophy girl for a couple of the races, and we were going to film her giving this guy the trophy. This is Jim Evans, whom we knew was going to win the race before it started. As you can see, this was shot in the 70s, quite a bit later because they used a live engine start. But you can still see the track is virtually uninhibited. There's still no fencing to speak of. So after the race was over, we had arranged for him to pull up to the start-finish line for this trophy presentation. It was very disappointing. The girl's boyfriend had followed her up here. She gets a hold of Evans, and she turns him and gives him her cheek, and she says, don't kiss me on the mouth, my boyfriend's watching. And so Evans goes off to ride another race. And the poor girl who had a chance to be a magnificent movie star drifted into obscurity and oblivion. Now, we shot this part of it later after the racing was over. But he finally nags her so much, she figures the only way she's going to get rid of him is to get on the bike and go for a ride. Now watch this. This is a one-kick Vincent. As they all should be. So now we're going to go for a ride, finally. That bike had 7 painted parts on it. Everything else was chrome and polish. We took a camera bike and followed this one around, because if there's anything I hate in motion picture production, it's process photography. So I was taking it pretty easy in the corners, riding around. Well, I think I might have gotten the bike up to about 70 or 80 miles an hour in the sweeper, and that was about it. You have to compliment the track owner, Bill Huth, for being such a great guy and allowing people to do extraordinary things at Willow Springs Raceway. Whenever you go to a race meet at Willow Springs, you're always treated like they want you there, like you're welcome. You don't get shoved around and treated badly by the pit personnel and by the track people. They always seem to be happy that you're there. Now here we're going down the back straightaway, about the same place where we shot those pictures of Linda Sobeck, the still shots, in 1986. And there we're coming into the sweeper. Not going too fast, about 60 or 70. As I said, I didn't want to scare the girl. And that was the first time she'd ever ridden with me. I had high hopes for her and making a motorcycle movie and starring that bike, but unfortunately it never happened. I do have some still shots that we took of her in a closed room one time, with several different types of bikini bathing suits on. And the girl did have a great body on her. At that time, she just turned 18 and was just getting ready to graduate high school. So he's trying to give her a kiss, and she's pulling away. She says, "Okay, bring your bike out to the next race, and then we'll carry on from there. You got me to go around the track with you now. Let me see what you can do next race." And our hero rides off into the sunset. This film should have been closer to the front of the tape, but I didn't pull it out because it was mixed in with some other stuff I was running. This was taken in the early 50s. I really don't know what year, at Hourglass Field in San Diego. I sent a copy of this tape down to Sonny Angel to ask him to identify some of these riders for me. Here's an International Norton, and Sonny's had the tape about a year and a half, and he hasn't identified these riders yet. There's one rider in there that I can absolutely identify for sure, and that's number 96, Marty Dickerson, on his Vincent Gray Flash. And I'm just wondering how many races, looked like a guy went into the fence, that Marty had ridden before these pictures were taken of him. These pictures were taken quite a few years before he built that dustbin fairing for his bike. Actually, the color on this film is in excellent condition. Some of that grainier stuff that you saw before was shot in old 8mm. This was shot in 16mm. And the reason I included it on the tape was because there is a few, although albeit brief, shots of Dickerson on his Vincent Gray Flash. Unfortunately, this race occurred before I started road racing at Willow Springs, so I know a few of the riders that are standing at the trophy presentation at the end of the film. But as far as the guys on the track and the bikes and everything, it was all before I got into road racing, so I can't identify any of them. I was hoping that Sonny would be able to look at the tape and give me a list of who these guys were, because he was riding that day and he should remember quite a few of them. we used to say that bump starting separated the men from the boys. A lot of guys really hated doing it. I didn't really mind it that much. I thought it was a great challenge to the rider's ability to be able to start his bike. And of course I was pushing a Vincent twin, which was my first road race bike. Was at there's Dickerson on his gray flash, number 96. There's a Norton Manx, number 14. It might have been Keith Lane. Dickerson again, number 96. Dickerson rode that bike fairly successfully in the AMA, competed at a road race at Torrey Pines in the yellow plate amateur division, and would have got a second place, only he thought it was the last lap when it wasn't, and didn't read his pit signal properly, and Frank Brundage passed him on the last lap. There he is again, number 96. But he got a third place that day at Torrey Pines, and in those days if you came first, second, or third, you had to break your engine down after the race so they could measure it. And while the other guys were still fooling with their cylinder bolts, Marty popped that oil tank off with 2 bolts and the seat bolt, 3 bolts, and he popped that oil tank off and 4 more bolts, and he had that head off so fast it just astounded the people. They had no idea how quickly a Vincent could be accessed to the top of the engine. I think that it was a very nice racetrack to ride, because it just looks like it would have been an awful lot of fun, you know. And they were running it clockwise, which is the same way we always ran Willow Springs. In the very early days of Willow Springs, the AMA ran it backwards. They ran it counterclockwise, dirt track style, made everything left-hand turns. And so there was always a debate as to who were the better riders, the guys that were going in the Grand Prix direction or the guys that were going the AMA direction. Obviously a warm day, clear blue sky, not a cloud in sight.